今回のテーマは日本語の一回や一旦を英語でどう表現するかについてです。例えば、一回会社を辞めて来年戻るという状況を英語で表そうとすると、多くの方が once や one time を使いたくなるかもしれませんね。しかし、そんなに簡単な話ではありません。あくまで自分の意見にはなんですが、日本語には独特な特徴があります。一回や一旦のようなシンプルな言葉でも文脈、状況、背景によって大きく変わります。要するに once をそのまま一回や一旦と等しいものとして使うのは難しいんです。今回のテーマについてしっかり掘り下げてみたいと思います。動画の後半ではね、ちょっと難しい英語表現が出るかもしれませんが、ぜひ頑張って最後まで見てくださいね。Alrighty then, you and me are taking a deep dive on the topic. We'll look at it in 4 logical steps. Look at the problem, the reason, the solution, and some example sentences. Let's get cracking. First, let's look at the problem. I'll go back home once and then go out again. I'll go back home once and then go out again. So, this is the kind of sentence that often gets blown over in a fast-paced conversation with a native speaker. So, what do I mean by blown over? Well, we sense there's something wrong, but we just kind of ignore it. We let it slide. But not this time. It's these kinds of little points that I like to focus on in this series. If you're an experienced English learner, I'm sure you'll soon see where I'm coming from. So, to set the scene, let's take a look at the kind of conversation I'm talking about. I've got some bad news, Scott. Oh no! What's happened this time? It's about your favorite student, Hiroyuki. He has to stop his English lessons. No way! He's been coming here for over 10 years. He's never missed a class. Yeah, but he's apparently really busy at work right now. What a bummer. Oh, I'm going to miss him. But I do have some good news. What's that? He said he's going to leave the school one time and come back again next year. One time? Yeah, one time. He's gonna leave one time. Yeah, he wants to come back one time. Well, what does he mean by that? It's just a figure of speech. Okay, well, it doesn't make much sense to me, but I'll be sorry to see him go. So, can you see where I'm going with this one? If you talk like this in English, the person is probably going to get what you're talking about by looking at the context of the conversation, but it's not the smoothest way of communicating. Let's look at the reason why. So, we're looking at the reasons why Japanese expressions ikkai and ittan don't neatly translate into one time in English. So, I think the main difference here is the fact that these particular Japanese words depend heavily on context. It's all about the context. Another big thing is that they often imply temporary or transitional actions, which makes it kind of confusing if you just say one time in English. So what I'm trying to say is, in English, in this particular case, you need a much more nuanced translation. Just say it simply. Say it more directly and, straight when speaking in English. So in my opinion, Japanese often prioritizes concepts or intentions over the specific actions and the details, while contrastingly, English tends to prioritize specific actions and details over concepts and intentions. So they're kind of working against each other in a sense. It's funny how language works. Because of this, 一回 and 一旦 can feel broader and more fluid and flexible than their English equivalents. So, in order for a Japanese speaker to sound as natural as possible, you need to have a more interpretive translation. Basically, you need to have a deeper understanding and knowledge of how each language works. Would a native speaker understand if you said, I'll go back home once and then go out again? Probably not. So, when I was in Scotland last week, I knew I was going to make this video, so I asked my brother if he understood this sentence. I was met with a few seconds of silence as he tried to work it out. And he finally said, no, it doesn't really make sense. It's a bit confusing. I think that's pretty good evidence that I'm onto something here. So, how about the solution? What should you be saying? Well, I'll talk about that in the next section. I want to break the solution into 3 points just to compare how the languages are used differently. Point 1, temporary or transitional nature. So what do I mean by that? Well, in Japanese, 一回 or 一旦 often suggests doing something temporarily for a short time or as like a step in a larger plan. Let's look at this example. 一回会社を辞めて来年戻る. So the literal translation of this would be, I'll quit my job once and return next year. A more natural translation would be, I'll leave my job for now and come back next year. The emphasis is not on the action happening once, but more on its temporary or provisional nature. So in English, we'd often use phrases like for now or for the time being, or just completely rephrase it to reflect the broader intent behind the action. Point 2, focus on sequence or process. So an expression like 一旦 can often show an intermediate step or a break in a sequence of events. Here's an example. 一旦家に戻ってからまた出かける. So the literal translation of this would be, I'll go back home once and then go out again. A more natural way of saying this in the natural translation would be, I'll swing by my house first before heading out again. So in the Japanese sentence, 一旦 implies that returning home is part of a sequence. But English often breaks this kind of sentence into 2 connected ideas or uses transitional adverbs like then, next, or first to show the feeling of sequence or process. Point 3, flexibility in translation. This is an interesting one. Japanese words like 一回 or 一旦 are highly context dependent. So this means that their translation can change depending on what the speaker wants to say. A really good example of this would be 一旦落ち着いて考えましょう. So the literal translation would be something like, let's calm down once and think. A much more natural translation would be, let's take a moment to calm down and think. So the point here is that the focus is on the action of pausing or taking a step back, and not on the doing it one time. English translations often emphasize the implied action or intentions by using expressions like taking some time, taking a moment, or giving yourself some headspace. So rather than strictly translating it to one time. Okay, so here is a little quiz. I've got 5 questions for you. Good luck. We've decided to call off the wedding for now, while we work our way through a few things. So call off is similar to the word postpone, but for some reason, we often use it for cancelling weddings. It sounds kind of final, but as we're using for now, it could possibly go ahead at some point in the future, to call off.
This project just isn't cutting the mustard.
I hear you. I think we all need to take a step back and rethink the entire thing. So we had an interesting expression there, not cutting the mustard. So this basically means something is not good enough. It's not of a high enough standard. It's just letting everybody down. So it's usually used in the negative sense, as in not cutting the mustard. Sometimes it's used in a positive way, but in most cases, it's used negatively with not. Is it okay if I quickly pop back home and get changed before we head out to the party? The expression to pop is used a lot in British English. It means to do something very quickly, such as pop into a shop, or pop round my friend's house for a coffee, or pop back home. We've been thinking about getting a dog, but we've decided to put it on the back burner for now. When you put it on the back burner, you kind of make something less of a priority. This expression comes from cooking. So on a cooker, you usually have 4 burners. The front 2 burners are usually on a high heat, and the back 2 are on a lower heat. If you put it on the back burner, you don't need it right away. So you can do something a little bit later. Let's take a moment to get all our ducks in a row before we make our final decision. So when you get all your ducks in a row, it means to get everything organized and prepared before you start doing something. It's kind of a cute little expression, don't you think?